Matthew 25, and we were looking at a group of parables we're calling stewardship parables, although this first one, the parable of the talents, does have to do some with stewardship, but it's also a companion parable, really, as it comes on the heels of the foolish wise and foolish virgins. Both of these parables being part of the, and we'll look at it before our study is through in the next month or so. But both of them occur in the Olivet Discourse. Jesus has, in Matthew 24, discussed the destruction of Jerusalem first. In the first, I don't remember exactly, 34, 35 verses. Whenever he gets to the part where he says, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away, he then begins a discussion he's the beginning of a discussion of the end of the world, actually, in his second coming. And so and we'll get back to the parable of the virgins, but the parable of the virgins emphasizes, and we're going to look at a trilogy of parables that talk about preparedness, being ready. Well, the question is, he follows up with the parable of the talents. What am I supposed to do while I'm being ready? And what does it mean to be ready? Some people think to be ready is, it's kind of like you pack your bag and you're waiting for the Uber driver to pick you up. Well, that's not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about just sitting around doing nothing and waiting. But we're talking about our responsibilities to use what God has given us in His service. And that's what the parable of the talents is about. And we've read it through a couple of times already, and we were really getting toward the end of our discussion. But we noticed this kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country, Christ, who calls his servants, that is his disciples, and delivers his goods. And notice he gives them talents. These are units of money. We use the word differently today, but probably worth about $1,000 each. A lot of money back then. And he gives 5, 2, and 1. And so although they get differing amounts, but they get these amounts, notice it says according to each his own ability. And then he goes on his journey. Well, and we've already looked at this quite a bit, but there's no indication that life was any easier for the 5-talent man and the 2-talent man than it was the 1-talent man. Now, there's no indication that they didn't have to work to do what they did. They didn't have some challenges or obstacles to overcome. But they went out and used and made more. And so, of course, they were commended for that. We'll talk about that a little more. But the 1-talent man did what? Well, he hit it in the ground. Didn't do anything with it. And we noticed, of course, last week that, God gives to every man what he needs to accomplish what he needs to do for God. And it's going to be based on his ability. And no, we're not all equal in ability. We don't all have the same abilities. That's life. I realize that socialists and communists don't understand that. They do understand that. They just want to keep everybody in the same misery and mediocrity. But it's not about, life's not fair, I don't have as much as you. Well, that is life. But God expects us to make use of what we do have. It's interesting to me, too, that usually the liberals and left-wingers of our day, it's always, about victims. Poor me. Isn't it funny in this parable how the guys that won were the guys that had more? Right? It was the poor victim because he let himself be a victim. Well, I didn't get what they got. And then he starts doing what? What else does he do? Hey, he blames, and then there's the blame game, right? We mentioned last week this quote by Barclay, the Scottish theologian, we cannot be equal in achievement, but we can be equal in effort, right? But I have to make do with what I have, and this guy didn't have faith in himself. He was afraid. He decided if I can't be number one, if I'm not the lead guy, then I just won't participate. He didn't have courage to work. What does the master call him? What kind of servant? Lazy. You're lazy. God has no patience with lazy people, whether you're lazy in your service to Him, your spiritual work, or you're lazy in any kind of work. That's why I've said many times in here, Christianity, capitalism, and free enterprise only works with the Christian system because it emphasizes two things: freedom and hard work. And no other economic systems in the world encourage that. But this man was lazy. And then, of course, you know, these allegations of the master. Well, you're hard. You're harsh. And by the way, you're not only harsh, but you're unethical. Right? And, of course, we've been doing that since Adam, blaming God. And yet the Bible pictures God as what? A loving Father who pities and has mercy and wants what's best for His children. And yet this man says, you're too hard. You're too hard. Life's too hard. Well, grow up and quit whining and be an adult. And notice what he said about these other guys. Well done what? Good and faithful. It wasn't about the quantity that these guys brought back. It was about what? What's the key word? Faithful. Rendering faithful service. In fact, that's how Lightfoot in his commentary on the parables titles his paragraph in the book on this parable. Faithful service. That's what it's about. That's what they rendered. They were faithful. The other guy was not. Well, there came a time of reckoning, right? And what did those guys get that were faithful, by the way? What did they get? This is so true to life. What did they get? More what, though? More work. They got rewarded with more responsibility. Isn't that the way it is in the world? If some guy is a go-getter on the job, what does his boss do? Gives him more to do. If there's deacons in the church that are go-getters or any members that are go-getters, what do the elders do? Give them more work. That's what you get. And you know what? We like that. Well, let's look at it this way. You're a med student. Your dream is to be a world-class surgeon. But you have to go through medical school, and you have to be an intern, you have to be a resident, and then you get out and you're finally on your own. But you yearn for the day that what happens? People are knocking on your door and other doctors are sending you patients because why? You're the best. You're the guy that people want to do this procedure. You want the work. You want the challenge. You want the responsibility. It's that way in every area of life. It's a reward. It shows that you can be trusted, that you're reliable, that you're dependable, and that you're rendering faithful service. They got more work. Now they also entered into the joy of their Lord. These servants, these slaves got to sit at the Lord's banquet table. What a treat in that day and age. But everything that the lazy guy had, what happened to it? What happened to the lazy guy's things that he did have? Got taken away. Well, we have a phrase, a modern phrase for that, don't we? We use it when we talk about working out and going to the gym or like playing piano or learning a foreign language. What's the phrase we use sometimes? Use it or lose it. right? What happens when you don't exercise? You just going to walk in the gym next year and just do the same weight you did before? Is that the way it works? Your muscles atrophy. What happens if you take years and years of training on a musical instrument and then you just put it up on the shelf, whatever it is? Don't play it. John Manning and I were talking about this the other day, playing piano. Yeah. You know, these people, I've seen people, they take a foreign language 4 years in college. Pretty good at it. But then if you don't use it, yeah, you lose it, right? So that's what happens. It's true to life. It's true in the spiritual realm as well, according to Jesus. But again, it wasn't because these guys were so smart. Just faithful service was what their master was looking for. I like what one commentator I was reading said. God does not want extraordinary people who do extraordinary things nearly as much as He wants ordinary people who do ordinary things extraordinarily well. Just put some effort into it. We all need to be better at that. It's easy to go home. It's much easier to go home at night, eat dinner, and get in the lazy boy or whatever you have and turn the TV on and watch the ball game or whatever it is. That's a lot easier than going to check on a church member or family member or neighbor that you know is down and out or needs some assistance, or making some calls, or pinning a few cards, you know, to those who need it. I mean, that's a lot easier, right? And we talked about this, we were talking about, that really gets us back to the Pharisee and the publican. The Pharisee was all proud of what? What was he so proud of? What was he proud of about his life? Wasn't he proud of the things he didn't do? He was proud of things he didn't do. The question is, what did he do? I mean, aside from his attitude and all that. I mean, we can be proud of the fact that, okay, I'm here when the doors open. I'm here for Bible class, and I'm here to worship. Well, what about after that? What do I do? What's my faithful service? I guess it was Lincoln. Wasn't it Lincoln that said God must love the common people? Because He made so many of them. There's a lot more one-talent people than there are five. But we all have responsibility, and it doesn't matter. And that's the thing about a loving God. And this is where this guy, his assessment of his master was way off. Is that God doesn't expect what? He doesn't expect from us something we cannot do. And God knows everybody's abilities in here better than we know. Everybody in this room, He knows what your abilities are and what mine are. And therefore, He has a certain level of expectation for everybody in this room, and they're not all going to be the same. And sometimes it's not even ability. There's other things that factor into this whole talent situation. Some of it could be opportunity. There are people in areas that they don't have the opportunities that you might, or I might not have the opportunities they have. But the bottom line is, God knows all that. And He is a loving Father and doesn't expect more of His children than what He knows they can do, and doesn't give us assignments that we can't do. But if He knows there's something He can do, He will give us everything we need to accomplish it. Yeah.
One of the things about a wicked government, looking at China today, is that they're taking everybody, making them common, and putting all this talent and ability. You're gonna go to a shoe factory, and you're gonna put soles on shoes. And here's this 5 talented
Yeah.
men being forced by a government that equalizes everybody.
Yeah, it makes everybody the same.
It's like in slavery. Here's a man in a rock quarry who should be an engineer, designing.
I think that they have some system of trying to develop, of sorting that out, but still, that's not freedom.
It's not right. It doesn't.
And you're still going to make mistakes. That kind of government and that kind of system, you can, if you want a picture of it in a nutshell, look at their women's Olympic team. Can anybody tell the difference between any of them? And they all look like men. They all have the same haircut. I mean, that's the society they want. Now, we go overboard the other way on individuality. People in this country think they get their net worth by being as different from everybody else as possible. Hence, we have Pride Month. I want to be proud. I want everybody to accept me for whatever deviant behavior I want to do, however I want to do my hair, how many ever tattoos I want to have and rings in my face. This is just me. And you got to accept me like that. That's the opposite extreme. Well, you're getting me off subject, Jerry. But we've spent enough time on the town, so let's look at a similar parable, but I believe a different one, in Luke 19. Let's turn over to Luke 19. Look at the parable of the pounds, because it does have some differences, and it was told on a different occasion. Now, Jesus has passed through Jericho, where he's encountered who? At the beginning of the chapter. Zacchaeus, the wee little tax collector. And notice verse 11. Now, as they heard these things, he spoke another parable, because he was near Jerusalem and because they thought the kingdom of God would appear immediately. Now, why would they think? What had Jesus been doing that they would think the kingdom of God would appear immediately? What all he'd been up to? What did he do back then in chapter 18? He's been healing people, right? The blind and the lepers. He's been raising the dead and preaching the good news of the kingdom. So, man, they're excited. They expect it to become a reality any minute. But the problem with that, of course, is Jesus knew that they didn't understand what kind of kingdom was coming, right? They're looking for a worldly, earthly kingdom. They're not understanding it in spiritual terms. And they did not understand that not only would he not set up an earthly kingdom, Jesus cannot set up an earthly kingdom. Right? The prophet said, Coniah, he'll have no seed to prosper on his throne. And Jesus also is a priest, but he's not from what tribe? He's not from Levi. He can't be a priest on earth. So he cannot set up it's not just that he won't, he cannot set up. And so he's trying to help them understand the kingdom. That kingdom to be received was the church. Christ is well born, that Greek word. He's a nobleman. Therefore, he said, a certain nobleman went into a far country to receive a kingdom, to receive for himself a kingdom, and to return. He'll come again. So he called 10 of his servants, delivered to them 10 minas, the New King James says. My footnote says that's worth about 3 months' wages, so that's a pretty significant amount of money. and said to them, do business till I come. But his citizens, now notice he called 10 of his servants and did what? He gave them the same amount of money in this parable, not different amounts. It's a little bit different emphasis. Do business till I come. But his citizens hated him and sent a delegation after him, saying, we will not have this man to reign over us. And so it was that when he returned, having received the kingdom, he then commanded these servants to whom he had given the money to be called to him, that he might know how much every man had gained by trading. It's judgment time, reckoning. Then came the first saying, Master, your minas earned 10 minas. And he said to him, well done, good servant, because you were faithful in a very little, have authority over 10 cities. Well, you get more. Notice the authority that Jesus has. You have 10 cities. And the second came saying, Master, your minas earned 5 minas. Likewise, he said, you also be over 5 cities. Then another came saying, Master, here's your mina, which I've kept, put away in a handkerchief. Same type of guy as the one in the talents. For I feared you because you are an austere man. You collect what you, and again, the same old business. You're too harsh. You're unethical. You collect what you did not deposit. You reap what you did not sow. And he said to him, out of your own mouth I will judge you, you wicked servant. You knew that I was an austere. And again, he's not admitting to the allegations, but he's saying, look, if that's what you thought of me, what should you have done? Why then did you not put my money in the bank, that at my coming I might have collected it with interest? And he said to those who stood by, take the mina from him and give it to him who has 10. But they said to him, Master, he has 10. You're going to give him more? For I say to you that everyone who has will be given, from him who does not have even what he has will be taken away from him. But bring here those enemies of mine who did not want me to reign over them, and slay them before me. Now this is this is the only parable that you read among various scholars and commentators that they believe that Jesus may have taken the basis of this parable from a historical event that these Jews would have been very familiar with. Now, it doesn't correspond apples to apples when you start breaking down the parable, but it's an interesting event that happened in 4 BC around the Passover. Herod the Great had died, and everybody thought Antipas was going to succeed him, but instead in his will he stipulated that Archelaus would be king. But Caesar has to approve this, of course. Who would have been the emperor at that time? Augustus, right. And so he would have to travel to Rome. But before he got there, there was a disturbance in the temple area, and apparently 3,000 Jews were killed by Archelaus' soldiers, obviously leaving a bad taste in the Jews' mouth. So he breaks up the Passover celebration and feast, tells everybody to go home, and leaves his people in charge while he heads to Rome to get Augustus' approval of his kingship. And so he's defending himself before the emperor over what happened. And the Jews actually send 50 deputies to Rome to beg Augustus not to make this guy king. It's terrible. And they said, look, we'll just take a governor, procurator, whichever one comes. I forget which one's appointed by the Senate, which one's appointed by the emperor. They said, look, we'll just take that. But after deliberation, he goes ahead and puts him in charge of Idumea, Judea, and Samaria, and tells him, I will eventually make you king if you prove yourself. Well, this knucklehead never did. And he was removed and banished in AD 6. And then after that, governors were appointed to rule over Judea, Idumea, and Samaria. And so the story is similar to that. A king goes off to get his kingdom. His citizens hate him. They send some people after him and say, no, don't give it to him. He gets it anyway. Now, obviously that's different. But that could have conjured up some thoughts in their mind of what happened 30 years earlier. But that's different in this parable because who's the fellow in charge? Who's going off to get his kingdom? Jesus is. But he's a good king. He's a righteous king. Goes into a far country, heaven, to get his kingdom. And then he comes back. And frankly, we end up with the same kind of situation that we had before. We've got faithful service. We've got unfaithful. Some of the same lessons we see from the talents. But it ends a little differently. Why do you think that? Remember, he's telling this parable because he was near Jerusalem and they thought the kingdom of God would appear immediately. But the kingdom wasn't going to appear until after what happened? His death, right? His death and his ascension. And then the kingdom appears and he receives it. Remember Daniel, 7? He receives his kingdom. He ascends to heaven. It's established. But he's a good king. And so when he comes back, what's going to happen? First of all, he's going to deal with his servants. That's two different groups. We got two different groups in this parable. We've got his servants, and we've basically already hit all the points on those. You know, some rendered faithful service. The other guy had a lot of excuses. And they all got rewarded accordingly. So we're talking about his servants on one hand, but what about these people at the end? Right? Bring here those enemies of mine who do not want me to reign over them, and slay them before me. And I could see a couple of things really him alluding to in that. What could he be alluding to? I mean, by and large, what was the Jewish population going to do with Jesus? Were they going to accept him or reject him? Yeah, they were going to reject him. Just like they'd been rejecting his prophets for 1,500 years, and they were his prophets. Okay? When we say they were God's prophets, they were the prophets of the second member of the Godhead, because who were they prophesying about? Him. He said, I've sent these to you over and over again. And the blood of this generation is all going to come down on, the blood of all the prophets over the centuries is all going to come on this generation. And that happened when? AD 70, right. For the people that he was immediately speaking to, they were going to endure a terrible judgment. But for everybody else, and both of these parables teach there's going to be a delay in his coming. For everybody else that rejects him over the centuries, since he's been here, the same fate awaits, right? Take these enemies of mine, slay them, who did not want me to reign over them. So, similar parable to the talents. Same lessons when it comes to these servants and whether they rendered faithful service or not. But we have this added section about, well, what happens to people who aren't his servants? What happens to people who outright reject him? Right? Any questions or comments? All right, we got one more we're going to start. I doubt we'll finish it. When it comes to stewardship. The rich fool. Let's turn over to Luke chapter 12. Now, if you're looking at the parable of the rich fool, it only runs from verse 16 through 20 or 21. But to me, to get the whole sense of what he's talking about, we really need to read down through 31, because it all ties together. Well, Jesus, what's he been talking about? Oh, he's been talking about some pretty important spiritual matters, right? Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. He starts out in chapter 12 and then starts talking about the providence of God and so forth there. What else? Some pretty important stuff. Confession. Mentions the Holy Spirit. Jesus is speaking on some pretty vital spiritual truths, and then he gets rudely interrupted, which is the whole prompting of this next section. Then one from the crowd, verse 13, said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Man, who made me a judge or an arbiter over you?" Jesus wasn't a civil judge or servant. That wasn't his realm. And he said to them, and he looks at this man, he sees what this man's problem is. "Take heed and beware of covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of the things he..." Why did I say the rich fool? Yeah, okay. I hadn't gotten to it yet. The things he possesses. Let me ask you this. Did Jewish law tell us who got what? Was it pretty straightforward as far as inheritance goes? And what was it? Okay, firstborn gets a double portion. So, who do we suppose this fella is? I mean, let's just take a wild guess. Who do we think this guy might be? He's not the firstborn. It's not fair. We're back to that again. It's not fair. He gets twice as much. I want more. He's got a problem. Jesus is talking about spiritual matters. This man is concerned about what kind of matters? Worldly, earthly, material matters. Then he spoke a parable to them, saying, "The ground of a certain rich man yielded plentifully, and he thought within himself, saying, What shall I do, since I have no room to store my crops?" Well, now this seems pretty, to be honest, seems pretty smart to me. So he said, "I will do this. I'll pull down my barns and build greater, and there I will store all my crops and my goods." Now, I think you get to this point, and you might think, well, that's prudent. We do that, do we not? We put savings away for a rainy day, right? Retirement, stuff like that. We just don't let you try. I would hope you try not to live just paycheck to paycheck. So that doesn't sound too bad, but here's the problem. Verse 19. "And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have many goods laid up for many years. You have many goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "Fool, this night your soul will be required of you. Then whose will those things be which you have provided? So is he who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God." Now, he goes on. He doesn't stop there. "Then he said to his disciples, Therefore, I say to you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, nor about the body, what you will put on. Life is more than food, and the body is more than clothing. Consider the ravens, for they neither sow nor reap, which have neither storehouse nor barn, and God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than the birds? And which of you by worrying can add 1 cubit to his stature? If you then are not able to do the least, why are you anxious for the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. And yet I say to you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. If then God so clothes the grass, which today is in the field, tomorrow is thrown in the oven, how much more will he clothe you, O you of little faith? And do not seek what you should eat or what you should drink, nor have an anxious mind. For all these things the nations of the world seek after, and your Father knows that you need these things. But seek the kingdom of God, and all these things shall be added to you." Well, this guy's wealthy, and we're not told in here that he was wealthy by illegitimate means. He's a farmer. It seems like a pretty noble profession, right? But he's not condemned for any of that. He's not condemned for being a farmer. He's not condemned for being a thief. He's not even condemned for having a great crop. None of that. But he's condemned for his covetousness. What is covetousness? What is the definition of covetousness? We've heard it before. Do what? It does boil down to idolatry, yeah. But we usually define it as greed, avarice, excessive or inordinate desire for gain. Selfish ambition to get more and more obsessed with something, to have more of it. And so you can be covetous when it comes to a lot of things. It doesn't just have to be money, right? Remember back in the Ten Commandments, God said don't covet what? Your neighbor's what? Wife? A lot of things you can covet. An inordinate desire for gain. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. That clause in the Greek, they say, can be difficult sometimes. One modern translation puts it this way: even when a man has more than enough, his wealth does not give him a life. Our life does not consist in our possessions. So, what was that popular expression of the Epicureans? Paul even uses it in 1 Corinthians 15, right? If there's been no resurrection, what? Eat, drink, and be merry. Now, the expression actually said, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. I missed that part in here. Is that what he said? He said what? He said, eat, drink, and be merry. Where's that part about for tomorrow we die? And look, the Bible has as much to say about material things as money, perhaps more than anything else. Remember 1 John chapter 2, right? Love not the world, things that are in the world. All that's in the world, what? Lust of the eye, lust of the flesh. Pride or vainglory of life is of the world, not of the Father. This man's called a what? What did Jesus call him? Calls him a fool, doesn't he? He called him a fool for several reasons. Number one, he forgot other people. 6 times he uses the word I. 5 times he uses the word my. Did he mention anything about the people that had harvested the crop for him, his workers? See any of that in there? Yeah, what about the people next door that might have needed something? You talk about them, orphans, so forth. I mean, I suspect there were some barns and storage places he could have put this stuff without building more, right? Could have helped somebody else. But not one time did he mention other people. And a man is obviously more than what he owns, which he forgot. Couldn't distinguish between what a man has and what he is. Does our society tend to think that way? Do we equate, and we'll leave it here and we'll pick up here next week, do we equate the value of people with how successful they are and how much money they have? And we understand that in the church, but even in the church, we might have a tendency to do what? Let's say it's time to appoint elders. What? What are we going to look for? Well, the guy's a successful businessman. Very respected in the community. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all. In fact, he should be respected in the community, but then what do we have to do to go deeper? He's a successful businessman, but is he successful spiritually? speaking, right? But we can all have that tendency to value people based on their earthly, worldly success. Well, we'll spend a little more time on this one next week.